Kawhi Leonard stands out as an unexpected superstar, and the Spurs were fully committed to building championship rosters around him until Kawhi forced his way out of San Antonio.
Kawhi Leonard, take one.
At Kawhi Leonard's peak with the San Antonio Spurs, he was a rare type of player. He was highly efficient, fundamentally sound, and exciting to watch. He quietly improved every season, even when it seemed like he had already fulfilled his ceiling. He didn't dazzle you with flashy moves or creativity. Instead, he consistently pushed his own boundaries through a series of gradual breakthroughs, and his style matched the organization he was playing for. He was a natural-born Spur, and they believed in him, enough to plan their future around him, until 2018, when Kawhi Leonard demanded a trade from the San Antonio Spurs. The Spurs acquired Kawhi Leonard from the Indiana Pacers in the 2011 draft. The season prior, they had finished with a 61-21 record, the best in the Western Conference. Tim Duncan and Manu Ginobili were aging, but were still effective players, while Tony Parker was 28 years old and leading the team in scoring. With Parker as their lead guard, the Spurs were willing to trade the 24-year-old George Hill, who was coming off a season with nearly 12 points per game off the bench. The Spurs sent Hill along with a couple other players to the Pacers to acquire the rookie Kawhi Leonard. Leonard was a good player in college at San Diego State, averaging 15.5 points and 10.6 rebounds per game in his sophomore season. He was viewed as a small forward who possessed a power forward style of play. Scouting reports described him as a great rebounder, with good size, but criticized his inconsistent mid-range game and very poor three-point shot. The Spurs saw the defensive potential for Kawhi, but even they thought he would primarily be a defensive specialist, filling in a role similar to Bruce Bowen, but Leonard became so much more than just a lockdown 3-and-D guy. Kawhi started his career coming off the bench, being put in a role to develop as a young player, but by playoff time, he was the starting small forward for the Spurs. The Spurs made it to the conference finals that year, but lost to the Thunder in a 6-game series. During the summer that followed his rookie season, Leonard was among the rising stars of the NBA, selected to join the 2012 USA Men's Basketball Select Team. They played alongside the Olympic team, where he trained among NBA greats, including Kobe Bryant, who would mentor Leonard for years to come. In his second year in the NBA, Leonard and the Spurs won their conference, ascending to the NBA Finals, and the sophomore Kawhi was given the task of guarding the Miami Heat's best player, LeBron James. While the Spurs ultimately lost in a tough 7-game series, Leonard showed major signs of growth, averaging 13.5 points per game, 9 rebounds per game, and nearly 2 steals per game throughout their playoff run. Of course, the next year, in Kawhi's third season, the Spurs again graced the stage of the NBA Finals, and Kawhi continued to exceed the NBA world's expectations, winning his first NBA Finals MVP award after averaging 17.8 points per game in that 5-game rematch, where he was again taking on the responsibility of guarding LeBron James.
I had a great group of guys behind me, just pushing me, just wanted me to do, just be aggressive in the game. And they just told me I got to keep being aggressive every night for us to win this series. They all pushed me, Coach Pop
For the
pushed
first
me,
4
the
years of
fans
his
pushed me.
career, Leonard was developing, essentially waiting his turn to become the team's leader. In his fourth season, Kawhi led the team in scoring, marking the first time a player not named Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, or Manu Ginobili led the team in that stat since the 1996-97 season. And while his scoring was continuing to improve, Leonard also maintained his status as an elite defender. That season, he won the Defensive Player of the Year award, becoming just the third player at that time to have won a DPOY and an NBA Finals MVP award, joining the likes of Michael Jordan and Hakeem Olajuwon. That season, Leonard dramatically improved his three-point shooting, jumping to 44% from beyond the arc, a 10% increase from the previous season, showing that Leonard's previous weaknesses were becoming huge strengths. It's important to note that as Kawhi was developing into a superstar, the Spurs were beginning to build around him. He was emerging as their leader. Tim Duncan was entering his final season, and Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker were getting closer to retirement. At that point, the Spurs were transitioning from the Big 3 years to a new era, the Kawhi Leonard era. In July of 2015, Kawhi Leonard signed a 5-year max contract to stay in San Antonio. A few days later, the Spurs also signed the 4-time All-Star LaMarcus Aldridge to a 4-year max contract. LaMarcus Aldridge turned 29 years old that year and was coming off a season averaging his career high in points at 23.4 points per game and recorded 10.2 rebounds per game. Pairing Aldridge and Leonard together looked like a formula that would keep the Spurs in playoff and even championship contention for the coming years. In the season that followed, the 15-16 season, Leonard took another leap as a superstar. His scoring improved to 21.2 points per game, and he was still among the best defenders in the league. That season, the Spurs were unbelievably good and recorded a 67-win season, but the Spurs that year, along with Kawhi's historic improvement, was overshadowed by the 73-9 Warriors and the unanimous MVP Stephen Curry. That season, the Spurs became the only team in NBA history to win 67 games and not be a 1 seed in the playoffs. Kawhi Leonard won his second consecutive Defensive Player of the Year award and finished runner-up in MVP voting. In the 2016-17 NBA season, Kawhi and the Spurs remained as one of the best teams in the NBA. Leonard increased his scoring again, this time averaging 25.5 points per game. The Spurs were again second to the Warriors in the West after another 60-plus win season, and with a better version of Kawhi and a more experienced Leonard and Aldridge duo, the Spurs were looking to do some damage. They also added veteran big Pau Gasol, and Parker and Ginobili were still productive pieces to the team. In round 1 of the playoffs, the Spurs defeated the gritty Grizzlies team in 6 games, and Kawhi Leonard averaged 31 points on the series. In round 2, they faced the James Harden-led Rockets, and in another 6-game series, the Spurs had 6 players average double-digit points, showing that they were gelling as a team, moving on to the Western Conference Finals. In that series, the Spurs matched up with one of the greatest and most talented teams in NBA history, with that version of the Golden State Warriors, who acquired superstar Kevin Durant in the offseason. The Spurs played the Warriors 3 times in the regular season that year, and they took 2 of the games in convincing fashion, including a 29-point victory on opening night. But going into the playoffs, the number 1 seeded Warriors were still the clear favorite. In Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals, the Spurs came out swinging. By halftime, they held a 20-point lead at 62-42, and the Spurs looked confident starting the second half until their superstar player went down.
And Leonard goes down again, and he's in pain again in front of the Spurs bench.
Kawhi Leonard left the game with 7 minutes and 55 seconds left in the third quarter. In less than 24 minutes played, Leonard scored 26 points on 53% shooting and recorded 8 rebounds. When he subbed out of the game, the Spurs held a 23-point advantage, but without their best player, the high-powered Warriors led a historic second-half comeback, ultimately winning the game by 2 points. Kawhi had already injured his ankle in the second round against the Rockets, and after landing on Zaza's foot, the Spurs season was over. Leonard didn't play another game in the series, and the Warriors swept the Spurs. And from that playoff loss, Kawhi's time in San Antonio was soon coming to a close. In fact, he would play in just 9 more games with the team. The Kawhi Leonard and Spurs drama and disagreements over his injuries is well documented, and ultimately led him to Toronto and eventually LA. But prior to the trade to the Raptors, Kawhi Leonard was being developed and prepared to continue the Spurs' legacy, being handed the torch from Tim Duncan to carry on a culture of winning basketball that lasted for over 2 decades. I mean, seriously, starting in the 1998 playoffs and continuing for 22 seasons, the Spurs have the longest streak of playoff appearances in NBA history. Kawhi Leonard's departure from San Antonio drastically changed a team dynamic that was being built for years. I mean, hypothetically, if Leonard stays with the Spurs, that streak could still be going, but instead, they were sent into a rebuild. But I guess in the grand scheme of things, losing Leonard back in 2018 could be a blessing in disguise for the future of the Spurs.
Down the lane, handing to
Thanks for watching Basketball Pantheon.